The settlement's medical bay hummed with the soft whir of atmospheric processors, their rhythmic pulse a reminder that beyond the reinforced titanium walls, Europa's surface was as hostile as the void itself. Alex worked quickly, his gloved hands steady despite the tremor that had started in his fingers 3 weeks ago, a side effect of prolonged exposure to Jupiter's radiation, even through the moon's ice shield. Lisa sat on the examination table, her left arm extended toward him, dark blood seeping through the makeshift tourniquet she'd applied in the field. The gash ran from her wrist to her elbow, deep enough that Alex could see the underlayers of tissue. What troubled him wasn't the wound itself. He'd treated worse during the colony's early days, but rather what he'd glimpsed in those underlayers before the blood obscured his view. "Hold still," he said, reaching for the dermal regenerator. The device was older than the settlement itself, salvaged from the first supply drop 15 years ago, but it still functioned within acceptable parameters. Lisa didn't flinch as he began cleaning the wound with antiseptic foam. Her dark eyes, almost black in the bay's clinical lighting, followed his movements with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. She'd arrived at Settlement Gamma 6 months ago on the corporate supply ship, her credentials impeccable, her background thoroughly vetted by Earth's Interplanetary Resource Commission. A xenobiologist, they said, sent to study the subsurface ocean organisms that might exist beneath Europa's kilometers-thick ice crust. Alex had believed that story until approximately 43 seconds ago. "The tunnel collapse was unfortunate," Lisa said, her voice carrying that peculiar flatness he'd noticed before, as though she were translating each word from some internal language into spoken English. "I calculated a 94.7% probability that the ice formation would hold." "Nothing's certain on Europa," Alex replied, focusing on removing debris from the wound. A fragment of ice, crystallized in a formation he'd never seen in 15 years of planetary geology, came free. He set it aside for later analysis. "The tidal forces from Jupiter create unpredictable stress patterns in the crust." "Yes, I failed to account for the temporal displacement of the resonance cascade." Alex paused, the regenerator hovering over her exposed flesh. Temporal displacement. A figure of speech. But it wasn't. Alex had spent enough time with the settlement's scientific team to recognize technical terminology when he heard it. Temporal displacement wasn't something a xenobiologist would casually reference while discussing ice formations. He returned his attention to the wound, activating the regenerator. The device emitted its characteristic blue-white glow as it stimulated cellular reproduction at the wound's edges. That's when he saw it clearly. Beneath the outer layers of dermis and subcutaneous tissue, where there should have been muscle and bone, there was instead a lattice of something else entirely. Crystalline structures that pulsed with their own faint luminescence, arranged in patterns that seemed to shift and reconfigure even as he watched. His hand froze. Lisa's eyes met his, and in that moment, the careful mask of humanity she'd maintained slipped just enough for him to see what lay beneath. Not metaphorically, literally. Her pupils dilated beyond any biological norm, and behind them, he glimpsed depths that shouldn't exist in a human skull, spaces that violated Euclidean geometry. "You've seen," she said, not a question. Alex's training warred with his instinct to recoil. He'd taken an oath, back on Earth, before the radiation and the isolation and the slow grind of survival had worn down so many of his certainties. First, do no harm. The wound was real, regardless of what else she might be. He kept the regenerator steady, watching as the lattice beneath her skin seemed to reach toward the device's energy field, incorporating it somehow into its own structure. "What are you?" A relevant question. Lisa tilted her head at an angle that was almost but not quite natural. "I am what your species will call, in approximately 247 years, a chrononautic observer, though the translation loses considerable nuance." The regenerator continued its work, and Alex continued holding it because stopping seemed more dangerous than proceeding. You're from the future. I am from a probability branch that may become your future if certain quantum conditions are satisfied. The distinction matters more than you might think. Alex's mind raced through the implications. Time travel, or something adjacent to it, was theoretically possible according to the latest physics models from Earth, but the energy requirements were astronomical. Unless the subsurface ocean, you're not here to study it, you're using it. Jupiter's tidal forces flex Europa's core, generating heat and maintaining the liquid ocean. That same flexing creates gravity fluctuations across multiple dimensions. The ocean acts as a— She paused, seeming to search for words. A lubricant, perhaps, between temporal layers. It makes the membrane between when thinner here than almost anywhere else in your solar system. The wound was half closed now, the regenerator's work accelerating as if the crystalline structures beneath were actively assisting. Alex had so many questions that they jammed in his throat, competing for priority. He settled on the most immediate. Why tell me? Because you've seen. Because concealment is no longer statistically optimal. And because— Lisa's expression shifted into something that might have been regret, if regret could exist in a being whose consciousness apparently spanned multiple timelines. Because in 73.2% of probability branches, you die in the next 6 hours, and in all of those branches, your death stems from not knowing what I am. The clinical atmosphere of the medical bay suddenly felt oppressive. What happens in 6 hours? The drilling team will breach the ice crust at coordinates 23.7 south, 156.3 west. They will penetrate into the subsurface ocean. This is expected. It is, in fact, the primary purpose of Settlement Gamma 7's existence. What is not expected is what they will release. Alex finished bandaging the wound, his hands moving on autopilot while his conscious mind struggled to process. Release. There are organisms in Europa's ocean, as your scientists theorize, but they are not the simple extremophiles you imagine. They are fragments of a distributed intelligence, separated when Europa's surface froze billions of years ago. Individually, they are harmless. Collectively— Lisa flexed her newly healed arm, examining it with detached interest. They become something your civilization is not prepared to encounter. You could warn the drilling team, stop them from breaching. I could. In several probability branches, I do. Settlement Gamma 7 is evacuated. The drilling operation is suspended. Humanity's expansion into the outer solar system is delayed by decades, and in the vacuum created by that delay, other forces, both terrestrial and otherwise, fill the void. The resulting timeline leads to outcomes significantly worse than what will happen here. Alex felt cold in a way that had nothing to do with Europa's environment. So you're just going to let it happen? I'm going to do what I was sent here to do: observe, record, and ensure that the optimal probability branch is realized. Lisa stood, testing her arm's full range of motion. In the branches where you survive the next 6 hours, you play a crucial role in first contact with the distributed intelligence. Your decisions, made under pressure and with incomplete information, set precedents that echo forward through centuries of human-alien relations. And in the branches where I die, humanity learns the wrong lessons: fear instead of curiosity, isolation instead of integration. The long-term consequences cascade across multiple probability matrices. She met his eyes again, and this time the geometry behind them was clearly visible, spaces folding into themselves in ways that made his eyes water. I am not supposed to interfere beyond observation. The temporal accords are strict on this point. But the accords were written by beings who had never been embodied, never understood what it means to form. She paused. Connections. Alex realized he was still holding the regenerator, clutching it like a talisman. He set it down carefully on the medical tray. What do I need to do? When the alarm sounds, and it will sound at 14:37 local time, you will receive an emergency call from the drilling platform. There will be injuries, severe ones. You will want to prioritize the platform supervisor, Marcus Chen, because his vital signs will be the most critical. Do not do this. Why not? Because while you are saving Chen's life, and you would save it, you are skilled enough. The junior geologist, Yuki Tanaka, will bleed out from what appears to be a minor laceration. That laceration was caused by contact with the distributed intelligence. If Tanaka dies, the portion of the intelligence that touched her dies with her, and the remaining fragments interpret this as an attack. Everything that follows stems from that interpretation. Alex's mouth was dry, and if I save Tanaka first, Chen dies. It is unfortunate but statistically inevitable given the severity of his injuries and the time required to stabilize Tanaka. But Tanaka survives, and through her survival, the distributed intelligence learns that humans value individual lives, even when efficiency might dictate otherwise. It is a small data point, but in a first contact scenario, small data points often determine whether civilizations become allies or enemies. The weight of what she was asking settled onto Alex's shoulders. You're asking me to choose who lives and who dies. You will be making that choice regardless. I am simply providing information to help you make it optimally. Lisa moved toward the medical bay door, then paused. Do you realize, human, that I'm not an ordinary person? The question hung in the recycled air between them. Alex looked at this being who wore human form like a costume, who had traveled across time itself to stand in a medical bay on Jupiter's moon, who carried within her the weight of centuries of consequences. I realize, he said quietly, that neither of us are ordinary, not anymore. Lisa's smile was the first genuinely human expression he'd seen from her. Good. That understanding will serve you well in the coming hours, and in the years after, when the settlement becomes the nexus of human-European relations, when ambassadors and scholars and those seeking wisdom come to learn how first contact should be conducted. Will I see you again, after today? In some probability branches, yes. In others, I will have already moved to my next observation point, my next crucial juncture. Time is not linear for my kind. We experience it more like. She gestured at her bandaged arm. Like layers of tissue, each distinct yet connected, each affecting the others. The chronometer on the wall read 13:15. Alex had 1 hour and 22 minutes until the alarm would sound, until he would face the choice that Lisa had laid before him, until he would become, whether he wanted to or not, a pivot point in history. Thank you, he said, though he wasn't entirely sure what he was thanking her for. The warning, the burden, the knowledge that his actions would matter beyond his own brief life. Lisa inclined her head, a gesture that seemed to acknowledge all of these things and more. Thank you for bandaging my wound, Alex. In more probability branches than you might imagine, that simple act of care has resonance. Remember that when the choice comes. Remember that compassion, even in small forms, creates patterns that echo across time. She left the medical bay, her footsteps silent on the metal floor. Through the observation window, Alex watched her walk down the corridor toward the settlement's research wing, her form solid and real and utterly impossible. He looked down at his hands, still steady despite everything. In 1 hour and 22 minutes they would have work to do, they would have a choice to make. And somewhere, across the branching paths of probability and time, countless versions of humanity would live with the consequences. Alex began preparing his medical supplies, laying out equipment for trauma care, for burns, for exposure to unknown biological agents. He worked methodically, professionally, because that was all he could control. But in his mind, he was already rehearsing the moment when he would have to look at 2 dying people and choose which one to save first. The hard sci-fi story of Europa had just become devastatingly, irreversibly human.